The last one is rotation, right? So I'm turning in space, I'm rotating. So we're going to talk about how the inner ear plays a role in equilibrium. Your body position, and then angular and rotational turning in space. How the body can perceive that and understand that. We call all that equilibrium, and it's done here in the ear. The other one, of course, is hearing, which we know. You're listening. Maybe you are. That's hearing. We hear sounds. We can interpret those sounds as being music, speech, or possibly horrible sounds, screams, or whatever. So the point here is that the ear is one basic organ, I guess you'd say, and it has two functions. It responds to different stimuli. It responds to equilibrium, responds to hearing. And these are independent of each other. Even though they're housed in very similar areas, as you're going to see, they respond differently, independently. Looking on page 10, this is the basic picture. This will be on your exam. I'll tell you that much. Okay? This is the basic picture of the ear. And it's showing you the ear is divided into three different parts. The outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. So the outer ear is the part of the ear that you would call the ear. A lay person would say, that's your ear. It's the auricle, which we call this flappy part back here. Okay? The helix and the lobule, we call the auricle, would be considered the ear. And then the external acoustic meatus, okay, the actual hole, forms what we call the outer ear. And really the only function of the outer ear is to direct sound into the ear. Cut it off, you can still hear. You just can't hear as well. Increase the amount, and you can hear better. Probably ever done that? Yeah. So you can increase the amount you can hear. You can increase the amplitude, the volume, I guess you'd say, in lay terms, of what you're hearing. That's all considered the outer ear. The middle ear is here. Okay? The middle ear consists of the tympanic membrane, the eardrum, we call it tympanic membrane, and three different bones we call the ossicles. Ossicles. Okay? So we have 3 bones in your left ear, you have 3 bones in your right ear. Now you know all 206 bones when we go through these. We'll go through. So I don't know if I told you before, but we're learning every bone. So we'll go through these 3 too. Okay? So we only really learned 200 bones so far. This makes the last 6, 3 in each ear. Okay. What's not shown here, well, kind of is shown here, the auditory tube. I always call this the eustachian tube, but people change. They call this the auditory tube now. And it basically connects the inner ear to the nasopharynx. The reason for that is because if this area can get clogged, then you can have issues with pressure. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. So this maintains an opening to basically your nose. So that if you go up in an airplane, you maintain the same pressure and you don't blow out your eardrum. Now, let's talk about some issues with that. We'll come back to this in a little bit. The eustachian tube, or auditory tube, again, is that connection point. This can become clogged. Okay? If it becomes clogged, with mucus, snot, whatever you might call it, right? Gets all clogged up, then this environment right here can become an anaerobic environment, meaning very little oxygen. Bacteria love it. They start to grow. And you get middle ear infections. That's what causes that. Okay? Is the eustachian tube gets blocked. Sorry, auditory tube gets blocked. And that leads to that. So some children have very, very thin auditory tubes. And the way to correct that, you put in a little plastic tube to keep it open. So if you get tubes put in your ears, that's what they do. When kids get older, the tubes fall out. That's all they're doing. Okay? So generally 6 ear infections in 1 year is enough to get your tubes put in your ear.
Unless you're under TRICARE and then you are so well, but it's another story.
Okay. So, as I said, auditory tube, and we have what we call the ossicles. Now, the names of these, malleus, incus, and stapes. Three more terms to be familiar with, three more bones to know. Malleus, incus, and stapes. And these bones basically will connect the tympanic membrane to what we call the oval window. And we'll get into a better picture of this in just a few minutes. Okay? So you can imagine sound, we'll talk about sound, making this drum, boom, 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 and those bones now are going to vibrate, and right here at this window, we're going to be moving. Boom, 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 boom. That's what's going to happen. So it's going to send the information, the vibrations, to that oval window. Now, the inner ear is composed of a cave, or a cavern, we call the bony labyrinth. And so the actual bone itself is carved out to allow passages of what we call the bony labyrinth. And there's several things that will go into that bony labyrinth. Inside that bony labyrinth, you then have a membranous labyrinth. So you can almost imagine, do I have different colors? Yes. Wish I had a red one. That's okay. How I do? So just imagine that this is a hole. Okay, we're looking straight in on it, right? So this, all this out here, this is all bone. Okay? But here we have a hole. This is a membrane, a tube, membrane tube. So we're going to have this tube going in it. Okay, so we have space between the bone here and the tube, and then more space inside the tube. Okay? Now, this is called the bony labyrinth. This is called the membranous labyrinth. And we're going to have fluid that exists within this space right here called perilymph, and other fluid that exists in here called endolymph. And that fluid is important because it's going to help us hear and have equilibrium. So when you think about the inner ear, think bony labyrinth, think membranous labyrinth, and think fluid on both sides, both within the membrane and outside. Okay? And that fluid is held in right here. You can see that membrane right here. You good so far? So now that you know that that's fluid, think of it this way. If I had a big water balloon, right, and I have it on the table right here, I could tap that water balloon. And if I tapped it, those vibrations would go into the water, wouldn't they? What do you think is happening right here? As you vibrate the tympanic membrane from hearing things, and it vibrates those bones, it's going to go to this oval window, and it's going to move it back and forth like this. And that's going to cause shearing forces, or fluid, moving within the inner ear. And that's how you hear, at least part of it. Malleus, incus, and stapes, as I said, are the three bones. Moving on, inner ear, membranous labyrinth, bony labyrinth I mentioned. Okay, the three parts. Do I have a better picture than this? Or is that the best one? Now, we got some other smaller ones here. Okay. The three parts that make up the inner ear. Three parts. The very first part is right here. And it's called the vestibule. So think about, we have a part right here called the vestibule. We have a part right here called the semicircular canals. And we have a part right here called the cochlea. The vestibule is its first part. The vestibule plays a role in both hearing and equilibrium. And we'll come back to how it plays a role in each one in just a few minutes. But you can see how it will play a role in hearing because it's connected right there. There's the vestibule, and that's where that shearing force is going to be picked up. The cochlea right here, looks like a little snail shell kind of curled up like that, is involved in only hearing, not equilibrium. So the cochlea is devoted only to hearing. The semicircular canals up here are devoted only to equilibrium, not hearing. Okay? So the vestibule is involved in both hearing and equilibrium. The cochlea is hearing only. Semicircular canals are involved in equilibrium only. Now when we talk about the vestibule, we're going to come back to these terms succule and utricle in just a little bit. You can't see them right now. So we'll come back to those two terms. Those make up what we're going to call the macula. M-A-C-U-L-A. I'll spell that wrong. These two L's. We'll come back to these two terms later on. Macula and crista ancillaris. These are structures involved in equilibrium. Okay? So the macula, we have two of them, called the utricle and the saccule, are in this area called the vestibule. That's where they're located in, and they're going to play a role in equilibrium. Okay, we'll come back.
The vestibule is not the yellow, it's like right next to
It's the pink. No, it's not the yellow. Sorry. Yeah, the yellow that you see here, that's actually the nerve. Yeah. So this part of the nerve here is going to pick up equilibrium. This part of the nerve right here is going to pick up hearing, and together it makes up the vestibular cochlear nerve for both. So it's just this pink right here. It's kind of hard to tell in this picture.
But you can say that it's in the middle of the two.
It's what?
The semicircular canal and the cochlea.
Yeah, the semicircular canals are way up here. And that's very distinct. Okay? So again, we're going to come back to the macula later on, but they're going to be in here, involved in equilibrium. The semicircular canals are up here, and that's where we're going to find the crista ancillaris. Again, also involved in equilibrium. But we'll come back to those after we talk about hearing. Okay? Just wanted to mention it here. The cochleae is right here. Okay? Again, involved in hearing. Inside the cochleae, we have a very special receptor called the spiral organ of Corti. You should know that. Spiral organ of Corti. That is the receptor for hearing. And we're going to find that inside this curlicue kind of snail structure called the cochleae. The spiral organ of Corti is going to respond to different pitches of sound. What is that? Well, frequencies. Okay? Which you can call pitch. High pitch, low pitch. Well, frequencies, we're going to have different responses. So a spiral organ of Corti will respond to a high pitch and a low pitch. We'll have different spiral organ of Cortis responding to these. And you're going to see how that's going to work in just a few minutes. Here, I'll show you this. I should have done this before. And we'll come back to this actually. Okay. So this is the cochlea. Okay? We're not going to get into all the details of how it's precisely structured because it's just going to be a little bit too confusing. I think an easier way, let me show you this. It's like this. So take that snail shell and roll it out. Okay? This is what it looks like. It looks like a large tube where information, the vibrations are going to be right here. So imagine I got the water balloon. I've got that wall right there. Now I'm going to push. Boom, 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 boom. I'm hearing vibrations. The vibrations are causing my tympanic membrane to vibrate. The sound is, every time I hear a boom, 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 that's vibrating. It's vibrating these bones right here, and it's causing shearing forces on that fluid. Does that make sense? How you hit a water balloon, right? Those shearing forces are going to travel along this fluid. And they're going to go through it depending on their pitch, depending on their frequency. Okay? At some point, if it's too low a frequency, it will go too far and come back this way. All along this membrane right here is our frequencies we can hear. Okay? If they're too high to hear, we can't detect them. If they're too low to hear, we can't detect them. So we have sensory receptors. The spiral organs of Corti are designed to respond to different frequencies along this long line. So we just wrap this all up, curl it all up, and it looks like a snail. That's the way it works. Okay? We'll come back to this picture in just a few seconds. But I want to show you that before I showed you this, because it's a little more confusing when you see it this way, I think. Okay? So you can see now how you have that fluid. Again, you have the fluid that's outside, and you have the fluid that is inside. Okay? Outside and inside. So this is the actual membrane labyrinth right here. You have in separation. This is your spinal organ of Corti, right here. And there's little hairs on it. Very similar to what we talked about before. Those hairs are going to respond to a particular frequency. A high one or a low one. Okay? again, along the length of the cochleae. So once it reaches a point where it can detect it, it'll then send a stimulus along the vestibular cochlear nerve to our brain, and we'll perceive that as that particular frequency or that particular pitch. A good picture to think about this again, another way, is like this. Again, here's our outer ear. Here's the sound vibration. Imagine someone hitting the drum. Boom, 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 boom. Right? Those are sending shock waves in their extreme case that are then being perceived by the tympanic membrane, and that's leading the middle ear, the bones, the ossicles, malleus, incus, and stapes, again, to vibrate in the same response, okay, the same frequency, that then go here, cause shearing forces on that fluid, and it goes around or through it, depending on the frequency. At the end, it comes right back out and goes out what we call the round window. So if we go back to the original picture we showed here, it'll start here, travel around and around, and if it can't find or it's too low, it'll come out here to the round window. So this gives you a good idea along the length of that how we can perceive different sounds. Again, frequencies, or you might think of pitches. So low frequency sound, very, very low, way over here, right? Medium, and then very, very high. We can perceive that along different areas. Again, think about this being finely tuned. Each of those hairs, each of those spiral organs of Corti are precisely tuned to that particular frequency. So we can perceive anything from 20,000 down to 200 hertz. That's our spectrum for hearing. Anything above that, anything below that, we can't hear it. So you can't hear a dog whistle, for example. It's too high. Okay? As we get older, those hairs can get damaged, and our hearing can get worse, especially with high frequency with males for some reason. Excuse me. And of course, if you think about those being hairs, excessive volume, if it's too high, you can damage those hairs, which is why your mom always said, don't put your headphones on and keep it too loud, right? Because you damage your hairs, your spiral organ of Corti will not respond as well, and you'll be turning that volume up more and more and more as you get older, right? We have limits on our television at home. You can't go over 10. Because we don't want our kids listening to it too loud, just for that reason. Right? Okay. Good so far? Okay. I explained the properties of sound. I mean, you can learn about this if you want to. I won't ask frequency or pitch, but again, frequency is the technical term, pitch is your perception of it. Amplitude is the technical term, or intensity. Loudness is your perception of it. Oh, that's way too loud. Well, it just has high intensity or high amplitude. It's the technical term. And this gives you a visual representation of what that would look like here. So all high or low frequency is how often the sound vibrations are together. So we have high pitch and low pitch. So is the frequency far apart, the wave going up and going down, or is it closer together? That's all it is. So we perceive those frequencies as pitch. And we perceive the intensity, the height of those, as loudness, volume, right? And that's just a way to describe that. So we have this general area here of what we can refer to the normal range of hearing, okay? Where we have loudness here, we refer to loudness, again, this is a perception in decibels, right? And we have frequency here. And so most of our general sound is in this area right here. Of course, if we have a very, very loud screeching sound like a smoke alarm in your house, we might consider that the threshold of pain. And of course, sound that's way down here, we can't even perceive. I won't go through the homeostatic imbalances on page 15. If you want to know about it, you can read about it here. Just a couple of symptoms or a couple of syndromes that are possible. I'm going to get instead and go with balance, which starts on the bottom of page 15. So we're going to be talking about balance or equilibrium. I don't care which term you use, they're the same thing, balance or equilibrium. And the ear does that as well. It doesn't just do hearing, it does equilibrium. And specifically what does equilibrium is the vestibule and the semicircular canals. Vestibule and semicircular canals. So this is a picture here I told you we'd come back to. Okay? So the vestibule is this part right here. Kind of hard to see that, okay, the way they drew this. But in this, you're going to have something called the saccule and the utricle. And we'll talk about these in just a few minutes because they're not really showing you here. They're just showing you where they're housed, where they're located. And not actually showing you the organs. And then over here, in the semicircular ducts or canals, we're going to have what's called the ampulla, or we'll call the Christia ampullaris, which is a way of detecting angular or rotational movements. So we're going to be able to detect balance, let's say linear acceleration, etc., here, and angular motion from here. Let me show you what I mean by that. So if you look on page 16, it talks about it. When you talk about equilibrium, you're really talking about two things. You're talking about static equilibrium and dynamic equilibrium. What does that mean? Static means not moving. Right? Dynamic means moving. So static simply means, okay, if you're not moving, if you're just standing up, or laying down, or standing on your head, you're not moving, what position is your body? The brain needs to know that. It needs to know your orientation in space. So that's done with static equilibrium, and that's done here in the vestibule. We'll talk about that. The other one is dynamic equilibrium. Equilibrium of movement. Are we going forward or backward, up or down? Are we turning? Are we rotating? Okay? Those are dynamic, moving. We can determine that two different ways. One is what we call linear acceleration. Linear. So we're going this way, horizontal, right? Or forward or backward, or up and down in an elevator. And again, the key here is acceleration. It's a change in speed. Okay, we're all moving. We're on the planet Earth, which is constantly moving. You don't feel that because the speed is always the same. If the Earth stopped moving, you'd feel it. Or if it sped up, you'd feel it. But as long as you're staying one speed, you don't feel it anymore. So we're only talking about acceleration, a change in speed. So if all of a sudden you're in a car and your driver presses on the brake, you're going to feel that. You're going to go forward, right? Or a speed demon takes the accelerator, you're going to go back, right? Or someone sideswipes you, you're going to go this way or this way. So we call that linear acceleration, a straight line, an elevator, for example. We're going to detect that here in the vestibule. And these two things, called the saccule and the utricle, are going to play a role in that. The other one is what we call angular or rotational. So again, are we turning our head one way or the other? Are we rotating? And if so, which way are we rotating? Are we going left or are we going right? Left or right? How do we know which way we're going? How does the brain know which way it's going? Well, it can pick that up in the inner ear to what's called angular acceleration. So as I said, I underlined it here on page 16. It says receptors in the vestibule monitor static equilibrium and linear acceleration. So right here, these two guys right here, the saccule and utricle, are going to be involved in determining whether or not we're standing up or laying down. Static. And also be involved in linear acceleration. Are we going up, going down, left, right, forward, backward? Okay? That's done here. Angular, in other words, rotational, is going to be done here in the semicircular canals. So now you understand why they're designed that way. They're kind of in different, and it's hard to tell here because it's not a three-dimensional model, but these loop in different directions. Like a big giant roller coaster, kind of loop in different directions so that you can have angular rotation, or at least detect it. So the macula, okay, and the crista ampullaris are terms to be familiar with. So the macula and the crista ampullaris. The macula is a collective term for these two, the saccule and utricle. They call that the macula. And it's involved again in static equilibrium and linear acceleration. And I'm going to show you how this works. This is a nice picture. I really like this picture because it really shows you what these things look like. And I'm going to you can draw it out on the board here. You can really understand what we're talking about, or maybe I'll try to do it with my hands, and if you don't understand, we'll draw it out. But okay. Now, imagine, use your imagination, that you have, let's say, a foundation, a rock, right here. This is attached to the skull, for example. This is not moving. And then you have hairs that are standing up, and they're supporting a structure like a rock that's being held up by these little hairs. Okay? So my point is that this rock can move around a little bit. It's just being supported. Think about like a brush or a toothbrush or a hairbrush, right? So here you're holding the hairbrush and the bristles are sticking straight up, and you've got your, say, a heavy object or a rock sitting there. So that rock can move back and forth like this, right? So if you move it this way, it's going to move the hairs one way. If you move the rock this way, it's going to move the other, right? So now imagine I've got this rock and I'm balancing it on the hairbrush, and all of a sudden I stop. This part of the brush is going to stay where it is. It's attached to bone. Stop. That's going to go forward. The rock's going to go with the laws of inertia, right? It's going to keep going if it can. It's going to move. Or if I go this way. Does that make sense now? So you have here something that's fairly flat, and now you have a way to detect forward or backward motion. Okay? Left and right motion. So all you have to do now is invert it this way, and now you've got your up and down. Okay? So all you really have here, and this is what it's showing you here, is this membrane, which I described as a rock, but it's really more like a kind of a gelatinous substance, that'll move in response to inertia. And it'll switch those hairs, it'll bend those hairs, which are sensory receptors, and tell the body that you have motion, left, right, up, down. And so you have different positions. You can see right here. The utricle is flat or horizontal, and the saccule is vertical. And so together, these two we call the macula, give us our sensation of dynamic movement, at least on a linear scale. And through a similar process, we can tell whether it's standing up or not. Is all the fluid flowing down? Think about it that way. If it's all flowing down, we're standing up. If it's flowing up, then we're on our head. So it can give us our position. Does that make sense? So again, the macula is involved in the vestibule. It's in the vestibule, and it's involved in static equilibrium as well as linear acceleration. The crista ampullaris. This is what the crista ampullaris looks like. And it's very similar in a way. What I want you to think about now is a tube. Think about a PVC pipe or whatever you want to think about. A long tube filled with fluid. Okay? So you've got the long tube and it's filled with fluid. Now the tube is stationary. I'm going to hold the tube. It's a PVC pipe. Okay? I'm going to hold it. But the fluid that's in it is going to be able to move freely. So I'm moving the body. And I've got this loop of fluid. Go back to this right here. Think about these loops. So here's this fluid. Okay? And I'm going to pivot my body. Now that fluid, right,